said, yeah. And he says, okay, what do you want? I said, well, I want this map from 1868. He says, we don't know where it is. We never could find it. So I said, well, is there a place where you keep really old things that no one ever looks at? And he says, well, there's this box on top of the shelf, but I don't know what's in there. We don't have the key to the lock. So I said, well, how about just bringing it down and breaking the lock off with a screwdriver? So he says, okay, we can do that. So he breaks it open, and the first thing that comes out of this wooden box are the original deeds to Brooklyn from the Canarsie Indians with eagle feathers on them. And underneath that comes out the original Dutch farmers' deeds from the 1600s. Oh my God. And at the bottom of this box, there's a scroll, and we open it up and it says Atlantic Avenue Tunnel. So he was very cool about it, and he made me a copy of it on his machine. He had a really big blueprint machine. So I opened it up on my dining room table, and after about 2 seconds I saw there was a blue dot in the intersection of Court Street and Atlantic. So I said to myself, well, if that blue dot represents a manhole, it has to go right into the tunnel at that point, because the roof of the tunnel is only like 1.5 feet under the surface of the roadway. So that manhole would have to go in because there's no place else it could lead to. Now remember when you came down the ladder, the roof of the tunnel was right under the surface of the roadway? That's the condition that I assumed existed, and that turned out to be correct. So the next day I came down here with the map and a measuring tape. So I'd never been in the area before, so I started off by the clock on the corner. And it was like following a treasure map. It was like 15 feet west and 30 feet north. And there you are standing on top of this manhole cover in the middle of the street that has nothing written on it. And there's no other manhole in the middle of Atlantic Avenue for a long distance. So I said, okay, this has to be the way in. So my first thought was to call up my friend and say, hey, come by with a tire iron and we'll just pry this thing open and see what's inside. But then I happened to glance down the road, and I saw at the next block there was a tall building with bars on the windows. So I said to myself, well, okay, maybe it's not a good idea to pick up manhole covers in front of the county jail. So the next day I went to the gas company, to Brooklyn Union Gas Company, as it was called then. Now it's National Grid. And I went to see Alan Smith, who was the vice president for public affairs. Now, the reason that I knew who this guy was and I was able to get into the gas company building was because when I was a senior in high school, I won a science contest for alternative energy sources. And the gas company was one of the main sponsors of it. My project was a working scale model of a satellite that orbits the Earth, carrying photovoltaic cells that change sunlight into microwaves, sends it down to the surface where it becomes house current. So you could have like one big satellite powering up the whole tri-state area for all its electrical needs. Except, of course, the satellite would have to be 4 miles long and 1 mile wide. So to build something like this, you'd have to have a real space program, not that nickel and dime excuse for one they have right now. So it's still science fiction. But you know what? Wait 30 years and the Chinese will probably build one. So I went to see Alan Smith, and he's like, what are you doing here? What happened? You graduated college in a year and you want a job or something? I said, no. I think I found the world's oldest subway, and I need you to help me find it. And he says to me, tunnel? What are you doing with tunnels? We thought you liked satellites. I said, no more satellites for me. I'm going underground instead. So he says, well, what do you need from us? I said, well, the experts said that's filled up with poison gas and exploding gas, so I'm going to need an air tank and a gas mask and a gas sensor. And then the other experts said there's water 14 feet deep, so I'm going to need a rubber raft. And then he said to me, well, is there anything else you need? I said, yeah, I need a Sicilian toothpick crowbar, 7 feet long, so I can beat up the 5-foot rats that are down there. So he said, look, he looks at his watch and he says, okay, well, it's too late today. How about tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock? So I said, great. So that night I went to see Raiders of the Lost Ark. It turned out to be really helpful for getting into this tunnel, and here's why. That night, I went to sleep, and I'm thinking about lost arks and buried treasure and hidden tunnels and things, and someone's shaking my arm in the middle of the night, and it's dark out, and it's my mom. I'm like, what's the matter? It's 4 o'clock in the morning, it's dark out. And she says to me, you know what? It was too easy at the gas company today. There's something wrong. Nothing's really that easy. So she says to me, you better get over there right now, or you're going to wind up with nothing. So she turned out to be completely right. I got to the clock at 5:45 in the morning, and the street's blocked off, the manhole cover's open, the gas company crew is there, like 20 guys, and the head engineer of the gas company is walking away from the open manhole cover, shaking his head in disgust. So I go over to him, and I'm like, hey, what's going on? And he says to me, you drew a blank. There's nothing under there. We picked up that lid, and all that's there is dirt underneath. Remember I told you before we built that trench, there was just dirt under there? So when he looked inside, all he saw was dirt. So then he had a few more adjectives that he used about it, which I can't repeat in public, but you can guess what they were. And he says, we're leaving now, you wasted our time. I said, hold on a minute. First of all, what are you even doing here? You told me to be here at 9 o'clock. Why are you here at 5:45 walking away shaking your head? So he says to me, well, you went to see your buddy Alan Smith, and after you went to see him, I went to see my buddy, the president of the company. And we decided that you're just a 19-year-old kid, and who needs you? You told us where the manhole cover is, so we'll find the tunnel ourselves, and we'll get the credit for the gas company. So I said, oh, but you can't find anything, can you? And he says, because there's nothing to find. There's nothing under there. So I said, okay, how about letting me look myself? So eventually he breaks down and says, okay, you have 5 minutes. So they tie a cable around me. And he says, after 5 minutes, we're going to drag you out with this cable. And then he gave me an air tank and a gas mask and a walkie-talkie and a gas sensor and a 7-foot Sicilian toothpick crowbar to beat up the 5-foot man-eating rats. So I jumped into that manhole cover, and in 2 seconds flat, I went from the manhole cover across the dirt to the other side of the concrete wall. And then I was stuck. Because at that point, you couldn't see the concrete wall. The dirt just went up and touched the roof of the tunnel 3 feet short of the concrete wall, so it looked like there was nothing down there. So here I am in this crevice, 70 feet down Atlantic Avenue, saying, okay, now what do I do? So I said, okay, what did Indiana Jones do in the movie last night when he couldn't find the way into the well of the souls right away? He dug by hand. So I began digging by hand, and after a few seconds, I found the concrete wall. And I dug a little bit more and found there was an opening molded into the concrete wall, but plugged up with cobblestones and bricks that were cemented in. So I went to pull out the radio and tell the gas company guys to come down, but I couldn't talk. All I could do was laugh into the radio, because all that went through my head were these experts telling me there's no such place because they couldn't find it. Now think about this for a minute. How many things in science and medicine have not been discovered yet because some professor tells a graduate student, don't go and research that. I couldn't find it, so that means it ain't there. You know, food for thought. So after a while, we broke through the concrete wall, and we knocked the stones out that were plugging it up.
That same day?
The same day. And a blast of cold air came out, just like in Raiders of the Lost Ark. So the head engineer pushes his way over and gets into the front, and he sticks his head inside through the opening of the wall, and he looks around, and he goes, okay, we're leaving now. I said, we're leaving now? We didn't even go inside yet. I said, why are we leaving now? Remember I told you there was a 15-foot drop down to the floor back there? There was no pile of dirt and no steps. So he says to me, you might jump in there, but you ain't coming up again, because we can't bring ladders down here. They won't fit, so we're leaving. So I said, give me 20 bucks. And he's like, for what? I said, just give me 20 bucks. So I went out to the hardware store on the corner and bought the chain ladder. So we climbed down into the tunnel, and we walked down to about where we are right now, and the head engineer of the gas company says to me, Bob, when we get back to my office, remind me to call the Port Authority. I'm like, the Port Authority? For what? He says, I feel like we're walking for hours and we're in New Jersey now. So it just turned out to be Hick Street. So that's how the tunnel got found. Now afterwards, I assumed that the powers that be in the city were going to open the tunnel up and make it accessible and interpret its history and whatnot. Well, you know what? No one does nothing. You know why? Because the people who could have done something back in the 1980s were the same people who told me not to look for it because they couldn't find it. So because they were jealous, nothing ever happened here. And to this day, they still never been down here to see it yet. So, you know, that's how the tunnel got discovered. Now, a short time after that, I got approached by the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce and the Rotary Club, which used to be active here a long time ago. And they said, can you come down to our meeting and tell us about the tunnel you found? So I'm like, sure. So I come down there, and after I show my slides, they pull me off to the side and say to me, hey, you don't know this, but a light rail line is being built from the Long Island Railroad Station through Fulton Mall and down Cabin Plaza East to Fulton Ferry Landing, and we're reinstituting the ferry from Dumbo across to the South Street streetcar line because it'll be like a tourist attraction. So then they said that we understand you have an engineering background, so why don't you work with us? And, and so back then you could get grants for this kind of thing, but not anymore because all those people who used to give out that money, like Jackie Kennedy and Brooke Astor, are all dead now. So there's no more grants for this kind of stuff, but back then there was. So I said, okay, this sounds like it'll be more fun and much more benign than working for Kodak and dealing with those crew. Now, years later, I found out the reason why Kodak acted so strange towards me and wouldn't tell me where I was going or what I was doing, is because back in those days, Kodak was involved with building optical spy satellites. And they wanted me to work on their optical spy satellites. So, you know what? If the Kodak would have just came to me and said, "Hi Bob, we want you to work on spy satellites, here's $80,000 a year," I would have said, "Sure, no problem." But instead, they made this big dark secret out of it and chased me away.